Welcome back to Getting Caught Up. For this episode, I had a chance to shoot the shit with a guy by the name of Scott Hickle, who is the co founder and CEO of a tech startup called Throne Science. Scott is developing a camera that attaches to your toilet and takes photos of your shit and your pee and then analyzes it with AI models. See what I did before there with the shoot the shit expression? Now, why the hell would you want to do something like that, you might be thinking? And that's a fair question. It turns out Throne Science's primary mission is to reduce deaths from colon cancer, which is the second deadliest form of cancer in the US. Plus, there are a bunch of other things people can learn about their health by having their poop and pee analyzed daily. And this is not an entirely new concept, as Scott told me. Do you know what the groom of the stool is? I didn't either, but Scott enlightened me on that and pointed out that North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, when he travels out of the country, brings his own portable toilet with him so adversaries can't get a look at his excrement. There is valuable information hiding in there, evidently. And that's the point of Scott's product, which is just about to go into beta testing. So I asked Scott where this idea actually came from, how they approached determining if there's a potential market for something like this, and how it went pitching investors with an idea for such an unconventional product. This is also one of the more unexpected ways in which AI is being used and has the potential to impact people's daily health. So Scott explained how they train their AI models. Quick reminder, please give this episode a like, share, or comment to help with the visibility of the podcast so I can keep bringing you conversations with interesting people like Scott. So let's get right to it. From Austin, Texas, and as he describes himself, the world's shittiest tech founder. Here he is, Scott Hickle. Scott, hi. Welcome to the podcast. It's great to meet you.
And thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Listen, I think that when we hear a lot about AI these days and how it's going to change our lives in all these different sorts of ways. But I think one of the lesser known ways AI may change lives is with what your company, Throne Science, is working on. I would imagine that this is not what people think about when they hear the words artificial intelligence. Is that sort of is that true? And can you tell us a little bit about this product?
Yeah, so most people definitely don't think of the toilet as the next immediate thought after artificial intelligence, but the application of AI to the toilet domain as a health tool is actually, I think, something fairly obvious. That's something people have talked about for a long time, and it has been referenced in movies and sci-fi going back decades. So
Really?
this is we are not, yes, we are certainly not the first to think of this concept. We are just the first to take an earnest attempt at solving it in the very particular way that we're going at it, which is using computer vision as the primary diagnostic tool or sensing modality. So Throne is a device that monitors gut health and hydration from your toilet using computer vision. So that literally means we're building a toilet camera, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a camera that goes in your toilet facing down. We talk about that a lot, right? Like looking up is there's nothing but liability, but there is
Right.
interesting health information looking down into the toilet bowl. And our goal is to help monitor the other half of the equation, right? It is very easy or increasingly easy to track what you put into your body. You know, especially with AI, calorie counting and macro tracking has become significantly easier. And it gets easier every year. But that's only half the equation. And right now, nobody is tracking their body's outputs. And we talk about if you are what you eat and your waste is what's left of what you've eaten after your body's had a chance to process it, there's obviously clues about your health in there. And it makes no sense to me that we aren't paying closer attention to that. And it really is kind of a uniquely American thing. There are cultures around the world that are much more woke to the concept of, you know, monitoring your bowel movements and your waste.
Interesting. So I'm curious, what countries have you? Because I got to tell you, when I saw this, I was like, wow, this is really different. We'll talk about like some of the your motivations behind it. But what countries? I know I was in Japan many years ago, and I noticed that they were much more ahead of like even where we are in today in 2024. I was there in 1990, and just in terms of like bathroom stuff going on. Is that one of the countries you have in mind here, or?
Yes and no. Japan is the, you know, famous toilet tech country, but more so for their really nice bidets,
Yes.
less for health sensing smart toilets. So generally, I think of smart toilets as falling into two buckets, right? There's the comfort and convenience smart toilets. That's where Japan reigns supreme. But
Right.
then health sensing smart toilets, there were some urinals that went viral over the past few months out of China that do urinalysis and basically measure different various concentrations and metabolites in your urine, like the equivalent of like $3 a go. And you just scan with your little WePay or WeChat app, and then you get your results. Then the other one that's kind of famous is the German poop shelf. So they have the shape of a toilet bowl in Germany is deliberately designed so that it's called an inspection shelf. So it's the stool sits there on a shelf so that you can get up and inspect it before you flush it away.
Wow. Now, have you used one of these?
I have not, but you can Google,
So,
inspection shelf toilet and see what they look like. I have
wow.
not been to Germany since starting this journey 15 months ago, but I can't wait to go.
Yeah. Now, I mean, so what do you know about that? Are they getting useful data from that? Or is it sort of like a gimmick at this point? Like what's, you know,
It's not a gimmick at all. I mean, there's all sorts of things that can manifest in your stool, right? Like undigested food can be indicative of gastrointestinal issues, and then correlating just the consistency and frequency of your bowel movements to your diet can help, illuminate sensitivities and intolerances, obviously worms and parasites. Um, so I wouldn't say it's gimmicky. I'd say this is something kind of, going back to literally the advent of modern medicine.
yeah.
Hippocrates wrote a lot about stool observation as a medical practice. There's like Chinese medicine talks a lot about this. Ayurveda coming out of India talks a lot about this. You some of my favorite facts, sorry, I'm going off on a little tangent
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
but some of my favorite just kind of stories from the lore of, you know, poop history throughout, the ages is there was a position in the Royal Court of England back to the 1600s called the Groom of the Stool, whose whole job was to monitor the king's poops and then liaise with the royal doctor about, his findings from monitoring the king's stool. And then kind of the modern day version of that is Kim Jong-un from North Korea notoriously travels everywhere around the world with his own toilet so that his stool does not fall into enemy hands because he doesn't want his health
Wow.
information to fall into the wrong hands.
Yes,
So
that's interesting. By the way, I didn't mean to suggest that any of this is a gimmick. I just more meant that one in Germany, like if it's sort of a public thing, is it like giving meaningful data, but all that is fascinating too. I didn't realize Kim Jong-un was guarding his poop so closely.
yeah, and the issue with the poop shelf though is it's the groom of the stool is that is the world's foremost poop expert looking specifically at the king's poop, right? Like you have a very specialized knowledge. When you have a poop shelf or the inspection shelf, it's really only as useful as your eye is trained. And most people are not experts in stool analysis. So is it gimmicky? You could argue it is insofar as most people are not, pediatric gastroenterologists who are exceptionally good at, inferring health information from stool analysis, from visual stool analysis.
Yeah. And so that's where kind of comes in then, right? It's like you clip the camera on your toilet, it takes the picture, but sends that back to an app, and then the app has the AI that uses the analytics, right? Essentially analyzes it and runs it up against, I guess, a bunch of different models. Is that kind of how it works?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So basically, all of our models are trained by physicians. Specifically, I mentioned pediatric gastroenterologists because they really are kind of the world's foremost visual poop experts. When you think about it, prevocal children, the only way they have to communicate about their gut health is through their poop.
Yeah.
So most gastroenterologists that you and I would go to don't spend nearly as much time looking at their poop, right? We've talked to some gastroenterologists. who straight up will say, like, I ask my patients not to show me pictures of their poop because whatever they say, I believe them. I'm much more interested in getting them in for a colonoscopy. Or I'm much more interested in their symptoms and, that conversation, less so looking at their poop. For prevocal children, that is the number one way they have to communicate about it. So pediatric gastros are very good at this. And so we've hired a team of those to train our AI models
Wow.
to bring the models up to speed and, again, bring the world's best and brightest to every toilet in the world.
Yeah. So you just mentioned colonoscopies, and I know one of sort of the stated objectives of Throne is to save lives from colon cancer. And I guess colonoscopies right now are sort of one of the most primary preventative measures for colon cancer. Is this like, but they're obviously notoriously unpleasant.
Mhm.
Is Throne like something that could possibly replace colonoscopies at some point?
No, our goal is to get people into colonoscopies sooner. Kind of pathology of colon cancer is it typically forms as a precancerous polyp and then develops into a cancerous lesion. And as early as that cancerous polyp or precancerous polyp, one of the earliest indicators of that formation is what's called fecal occult blood. So, the stool will rub against that polyp and, chafe it and cause bleeding. And it's often not enough bleeding to be seen with the naked eye, but it can be picked up. Um, right now it's picked up with like immunochemical tests. So you literally take a stool sample. If you've ever heard of Cologuard, this is what they do. They
Yeah.
like take a stool sample, mail it in, and
Yeah.
then they run these tests on it to determine if there's blood. The problem is people hate taking stool samples and putting in a
Yes.
box. It's like one of the worst consumer experiences that we ask people to do today. And yeah, I just spoke with someone yesterday who has IBD and has like a stool collection kit sitting on her desk next to her computer and just has been staring at it for literally 9 months.
Yeah. It just
After,
sounds like a nightmare.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And so our goal is to use hyperspectral imaging to look for fecal occult blood with every single stool sample. And if we detect that you had trace amounts of blood in your stool, there's a lot of things that could cause that, right? Hemorrhoids, fissures, fistulas, ulcers, viral infections, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. The scariest of which is colon cancer. But if we can get you into a gastroenterologist and say, here is the data that shows that you had blood in, 20 of your last 30 bowel movements over the past month, most GIs will say, hey, we should probably get you worked up for a colonoscopy, which is the gold standard for figuring out what's going on
Yeah.
when you have blood in your stool. And the kind of the miracle of the colonoscopy is if you get a scope, you can also remove the cancer in that same go, right? So you go in there, you look, you see, is there an early cancerous lesion or a precancerous polyp? Remove that. And like there's a pretty good chance, particularly if the person's like under age 45, if we can do that, like we can save very credibly, like we help that person's save their lives. And that I think is a very motivating, I mean, not think, I know that is the motivation for me, right? If we can get to the point
Yeah.
where someone can say in good faith, my toilet saved my life, like that is an amazing world, and that's the one I want to live in.
Yeah, I mean, that's an amazing, if you can do that too, that's just an amazing, like, sort of feather in your cap. Not that that's why you're doing it, but um, to be able to say that would be unbelievable. So just to go back to the sort of finding those trace amounts of blood, typically, let's say you're not using a throne and you go and you continue on and then you notice the blood, like what's the time, sort of the time horizon between when like throne can notice it and when somebody's just going to notice it with their naked eye?
I mean, so that's a great question. You might never notice it with your naked eye, right? Like the other piece of it is a lot of people don't even know to go to the doctor when they have blood in their stool. Like, I've got someone in my Twitter DMs who's found Throne and reached out to me to say, he is a colorectal cancer survivor. He had it at 28 years old.
Wow.
And the only reason he went to see a physician was because his wife made him go. And I believe his words were, I wouldn't be here if I weren't married.
Yeah.
And, as a unmarried 31-year-old, that's one of those texts you just get and you're like, whoa, like kind of knocks you back for a second. There's other stories, this is also a problem, particularly for the colorblind. So,
Mm.
uh, there are forms of color blindness that are particularly bad at distinguishing between red and brown, and that's one of the most common forms of color blindness. So we've chatted with people who they weren't diagnosed with colorectal cancer. They were diagnosed with very severe forms of IBD, specifically called pancolitis. So it's like the most severe form of ulcerative colitis, where basically the entire colon's just on fire.
Mm.
And we chatted with one gentleman recently who shared that he had used the toilet, didn't flush it at night because he didn't want to wake his wife. And
Oh,
then the next morning she woke up before he did and was aghast to find, what looked like a battlefield. And he didn't realize that it was all blood. He thought he had just had, you know, a bad bowel movement. And it turns
right.
out, like, no, he was severely colorblind and just couldn't distinguish between the fact. And so that's one of those things like we can help with that today just because Throne can distinguish between
Yeah,
reds and browns.
sure.
So without the hyperspectral imaging, we can do some of that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, it's not just like trying to find colon cancer though, right? That like users of Throne will discover about themselves, right? I guess it's all about basic health and even just like your hydration too.
Yeah, so we're starting as a health and wellness device where,
Yeah.
the colon cancer is ultimately the mission and that's the vision. And that's where we want to be, 3, 4 years from now. To get there, we're going to market as a health and wellness device monitoring gut health and hydration in a much more basic sense, right? So we're looking at stool frequency, consistency, strain, hydration, duration, flow rates, those types of things. We think of this as very analogous to like a Whoop or an Aura, but for gut health and urological function. With the
Right.
analogy, Whoop or Aura only show you a handful of biomarkers, but you get them every single day, as opposed to like you could do a blood test to get a lot of those same biomarkers, but 100 more, but you get that one point in time. Similar, we are kind of like the the continuous equivalent of like a microbiome test, right? We're not testing your microbiome, you're not getting your full microbiome analysis, but you're getting a handful of markers that correlate to that every single day.
It's not just your poop, it's your pee too that you're looking at, right? So it's like everything coming out of you essentially.
Yeah. And not only poop and pee, but also like menstrual discharge.
Oh, really? How about that? And what are you looking for in that?
Our goal for that is to make cycle tracking completely passive.
Oh yeah, interesting. Wow. I mean, there's so much going on here. I didn't even realize that, Scott. Um, so you have, I guess, a crop of beta users, right? Since you've sort of like soft launched the product.
So yes and no. We've pre-sold our first cohort of beta devices. We're currently assembling them. We're waiting on the last, batch of parts to arrive before we can do the final assembly, flash the firmware, do some QA, and ship them out. We have a cohort of what we call our alpha users, but they're
Okay.
using a device that, I, that really only a founder could love, right? This was the alpha device was like a Raspberry Pi with a webcam on it and a custom 3D printed enclosure. But we had to go around like that's all the testers are here in Austin, Texas, because we had to go do the manual installation for every single one ourselves. It
Right.
had to be plugged to a wall. It's not something I could send you and you could do a self-install with.
Yeah. So, I mean, how big is that group of people? I guess it's rather small, or
The alpha devices is roughly 20 people, and one of the big lessons we had took away from that was it was just simply not worth investing in distributing more of those
yeah,
because it was such a high investment of our team's time just to do the installs and the
sure.
maintenance, break down all the time. And we just decided let's stop servicing those and focus 100% of our efforts on getting this beta device out the door that we can send to you as self-installable. We can, because the other piece of it is, constrained to Austin, Texas. We really only want to do like anything within a 20-minute drive of the office.
Yeah,
It just gets, frustrating outside of that. So we wanted a device that we could mail to you and was battery powered because a lot of people just don't have a spare outlet in their bathroom.
yeah, or near the toilet. Um, so the people that you have in it, are they mainly, I guess, are they struggling with like bowel issues, or are they generally not? Like, what's sort of the breakdown? Like, what are people seeing or learning about themselves?
So the early cohort of alpha users is primarily our friends. It's the type
Yeah,
of people that we could approach and say, "Hey, we want to put a camera in your toilet, and we're building the app." So, there's the chicken and egg problem, which is we need to collect a bunch of data so that we can train these models to give useful information, but we don't have that useful information to offer you in return, immediately upon install.
Right.
So go to our friends who are like, sure, I'm happy to record my toilet sessions for you with nothing in return because, I recognize that you're a crazy person and I'm happy to support, uh, you know, your exploration of that crazy. Now we've gotten to the point where, when we do an install, you have the app, and the first thing is hydration, right? Just having some actual quantified estimate of your hydration. So the metric we're looking at there is called urine osmolality. So that's effectively, how concentrated your urine is. And our hydration model is quite accurate. And that's the first thing you'll get when you start using it, just because it's,
Yeah.
instantaneous. We also have bowel movement tracking, so looking at frequency and consistency. Uh, you can do that without the device as well. So there's a few things that you can track just with the app, and it's really just frequency and consistency of your bowel movements. But
Sort
even
of
that is,
like manually entering that info.
or taking a picture. So you can take a
Okay.
picture or manually enter it. If you take a picture, the AI will do its thing and
Yeah.
complete the form for you. You're also able to manually enter it if you don't want to turn around. It's an awkward user experience to kind of turn around, snap a picture.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, so we have that, and really kind of the way we think about that is just it's a nice little teaser to get someone interested in what is thrown and give them some early access to its functionality. Um, Really giving them as much as you can without the device.
Yeah. And I mean, what are you learning though? Like, are people are people who are using it now mostly well hydrated most of the time, or are they not hydrated properly? I don't even know what proper, like, how do you recognize proper hydration?
So a couple things. So there's a famous chart that used to hang above the University of Texas urinals in the locker room in the football stadium. And basically it was just a colorimetric chart, right? Like dark yellow was you're a bad guy, and very clear was championship hydration. And we are just quantifying that, right? So we're giving you, here's what your estimated urine osmolality is. We then translate that into what we call a hydration score, because most people don't have benchmarks in their heads for what's good
Right.
osmolality versus bad. Most people don't even know what osmolality is. So we translate that into a hydration score, 0 to 100, right? Where 100 is perfectly hydrated. um, you know, zero is obviously you're in trouble. I typically hover, I'm not proud to say this, but I typically hover probably like 70 to 75%. I've got friends that are much more conscientious about fluid intake than I am, and they hover around like 90, 95%.
Wow.
So it's actually kind of fun to see just the disparity. And like this is, I'm thinking of one friend in particular who we've shared our Aura Ring scores for years together. And so we are, competitive in our health in
Yeah.
that way. So he likes to flex on me with my own device, which is really, quite humbling. The other really interesting thing we see right now is people who have conditions like inflammatory bowel diseases, so Crohn's or ulcerative colitis or IBS, so irritable bowel syndrome. There's this concept of flaring, right? So you're not always having symptoms, but and sometimes you enter remission for weeks, months, years at a time, but then you flare back up and your gut's all out of whack, and you can oscillate between constipative to diuretic to like severely diuretic back to constipative all in the span of days or
Yeah.
like hours even. And seeing the charts for when someone flares is honestly just kind of fascinating, because again, like prior to Throne, you had if you manually tracked it, you could do that, but most people are not manually tracking their bowel movements.
Yeah.
Um, and so just having like the objective historical data of like how was my gut doing over time and when was I flaring, and then being able to go back and think like what were the confounding factors that might have led to that flare? Was it diet? Was it other stressors, exogenous things like travel or stress, like or lack of sleep, being able to go back and basically do correlations and
Yeah.
think like what could have caused that? Because IBS, for example, is defined as changes in the frequency and consistency of your bowel movements in the previous 6 months associated with unpleasant, GI symptoms.
Hmm.
Most people, like, your doctor, when you go in to say like, "Hey, I'm having bad bowel movements," the first thing your GI will ask is like, have your bowel movements been since I last saw you or in the last year, last 6 months? Like, Andrew, I don't remember what I had for breakfast 2 days
Yeah,
ago.
yeah. Who remembers that? Right. So, and that's the other thing. Since you bring up remembering breakfast, I mean, um, with the Throne app, you can actually enter in what you've eaten so that you can look for that like sort of cause and effect or causation. I don't know if it's causation, but correlation, right?
Yeah. So we've built out the food logging, very early prototype of the food logging. We haven't done the correlation stuff yet, but the goal
Yeah.
is to one day in the very near future, in the next year, be able to say, know, when you eat X, Y, or Z more ingredient, you are, 20% more likely or 80% more likely to have an unhealthy bowel movement, which could be indicative of a sensitivity or intolerance, which is different than a dietary allergy, right? Like a dietary allergy is autoimmune in nature. So that's something you can test for with blood tests. Sensitivities and intolerances are enzymatic. So that lives in your GI system. That's something that's much harder to test. And just looking at, your longitudinal gut health data and correlating that to your diet data will give us a much better triangulation of what's actually causing you those symptoms.
Yeah. And then I guess it helped you just avoid things that trigger that sort of stuff, right? Yeah.
100%. And this is something that people will pay hundreds of dollars a month for to consult with basically a health coach or a dietitian who will basically instruct you keep a written stool log, keep a written food diary, and then let's go back and do the eyeball correlations. We're just productizing that, making it way cheaper and automating a lot of the painful process.
Yeah. It's a cool idea. So you're using it then yourself, or you're in that alpha group?
Oh yeah, every day. I
Yeah.
like we have one at the office, I have one at my house, and then obviously I have my phone with me, and so I've tracked like every bowel movement for almost a year now.
Wow. So nothing gets by.
No, because like it's really easy to log everything. And like, when I'm at home or at the office, it's just literally with the push of a button. And where we're headed is making it completely hands-free. So just totally passive. Right now it's push button. Ultimately, we want this to be hands-free and passive. So you just walk in with your phone, a motion sensor wakes up the device, says, it wakes up and says, "Who's here?" And then it looks for my Bluetooth. And it's like, okay, cool, that's Scott.
Wow. So you've been doing that, and what have you learned about your own thing? Do you have any of these conditions that we're talking about? Like,
No, I'm someone who's generally blessed with good gut health. So I did an experiment back in June where for the entire month I
yeah,
ate 100% of my calories from ultra processed foods. And I, so a couple of learnings that came out of this pertaining to my gut health. The first is I did some theme days. So, one day I ate only food from a gas station. Another day I ate only protein bars. Another day I ate, only donuts. Another day was spicy day. And donut day and spicy day absolutely wrecked me. Like
really,
do- donut day, I was not regular for 2 days. Spicy day was the first day in my life where I've ever experienced like severe urgency, where like I was like, oh my God, I
really,
cannot walk. Oh yeah, I cannot walk another 100 yards or I'm going to, like shit my pants.
yeah.
Pardon my language, right? So
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 and the donuts had the opposite effect. The donuts like locked you up.
no, no, no. Donuts had the same effect, just less urgency, but I
Okay.
was liquid for 2 days,
Wow,
right? So
really?
yeah, and I don't know what it is, but there's something about Krispy Kreme that just always has disagreed with me, and that's why I chose them, right? Part of this experiment was intentionally to throw my gut out of whack,
Yeah,
and donuts and spicy foods were the two things that just absolutely decimated my gut. But then I bounced back very quickly, and after that, like nothing else was able to break my gut. Um, I did microbiome analysis before and after, and that also looks at inflammatory markers like lactoferrin and calprotectin. So, proteins that are excreted by an inflamed colon. I had no inflammatory markers going into the experiment and had, some inflammatory markers towards the end of it. Not nearly in the range of what you would consider like, inflammatory bowel disease,
yeah,
but like, also not non-zero. So that was an interesting learning for me. Um, so that's a very long-winded way of answering your question, which is just like, no, I am someone who has a shockingly resilient gut. But I think part of that is also due to the fact that I have eaten generally clean for the past 5 years, like intentionally.
yeah. And then just to go back to this experiment you did, that was 30 days of ultra processed foods, which is sort of calls to mind, and I know I saw it on your Twitter, the Morgan Spurlock experiment with the fast food for 30 days. But I want to just also sort of define what is ultra processed food. It's getting a lot of people are talking about it these days. I know RFK Jr. on the campaign trail, or now he's off the campaign trail or on for Trump, but he's been talking about it. But what actually is defines an ultra processed food?
Yeah, so great question. For the sake of the actual, I'll take a step back. So the actual kind of like textbook, clinical, scientific definition of ultra processed foods is like this 2-page long list of ingredients. For my purposes, for the experiment, I basically boiled it down to three things. The first was what I call the grandma rule. If it contains ingredients that, my grandma wouldn't recognize or like don't live in her pantry, that is almost certainly ultra processed. The second is the shelf stability rule, which is if it contains preservatives or emulsifiers intended to extend its shelf life longer than its natural counterpart, that's ultra processed. And the final one was just added sugars and oils.
Hmm.
So in general, ultra processed foods, I'd say, are just anything that uses industrial techniques to produce those foods, as opposed to, more home cooked techniques. And typically that's associated with additives, preservatives, emulsifiers, artificial colors, artificial sweeteners, um, bulking agents, defoaming, bleachings, like all of these industrial processes
Sure.
that
All
are
the
intended to make,
preservatives and yeah.
yeah, intended to make food shelf stable, because
Yeah.
shelf stable foods are more profitable because they don't go bad.
Right. And also the taste that also make them taste amazing, right? Like I would imagine Oreos are like probably top the list of like ultra processed foods, right?
100%. Oreos are one of the very first ultra processed foods. Those were invented back in the 1910s, and they were only made possible because trans fat was invented in 1902.
Yeah. So I saw a thing, I saw it on Facebook and I wish I could find it again, but I've never eaten an Oreo since I saw it. This guy like breaks down all the ingredients in it and it basically just seems like a death cookie. You know, he's like, these things will kill you. I don't know how much he was sort of dramatizing that, but
I think I mean, that's a great question. This leads to a whole larger conversation around ultra processed foods and like, what is poison? But it is one of those things that, like, kills you slowly, right? Like
yeah,
at the end of the day, it is still food. It is like, would you rather have a box of Oreos or no food, right? Like no food's gonna kill you in a week. I mean, maybe much longer, right? But like no food is much deadlier than,
sure.
ultra processed food in the short term. But ultra processed food relative to natural foods in the long term is definitely worse for you.
When you were doing that, so I noticed you at the end of the experiment, you noticed some markers of bowel disease, right, coming up. Anything else that your throne picked up when you did this in changes in how your gut health was, you know, going compared to usual?
I mean, like I said, right? Like I had two acute moments of disastrous gut health.
Yeah,
And, really, it was like five moments if you want to count the bowel movements, but there were five acute moments triggered by two discrete, meals. That was interesting, not only because, you know, the rapid onset of my symptoms, but also, you know, how relatively quickly I went into remission. I was feeling like horrible for at most 48 hours at a time,
hmm.
but, you know,
So you
bounced back.
recover quickly. Yeah,
Yeah, I recovered super quickly. And then, we like, I have a colleague on my team who likes to joke, I'm Mr. Perfect Poops, just because my gut is like exceptionally resilient, and I run like trains in Japan. So I am not, I get more value out of the hydration monitoring on a day-to-day basis than gut
yeah.
health monitoring, because I'm someone who's generally blessed with good gut health.
But there was nothing in it that, so it sounds like at the end of it though you were okay, generally okay, like not like Morgan Spurlock at the end of his experiment where I think wasn't he like pre-diabetic or on the verge of developing diabetes, like type 2 diabetes.
Yes, but I think that also had a lot to do with years of chronic alcoholism and, eating
So he was,
5 calories a day instead
yeah.
of, because my experiment was just fundamentally structured differently than Morgan Spurlock's. He ate to satiety and had to, supersize his meal if he was asked. And
Right.
he exercise. My experiment was holding everything else constant, right? So even my calorie count, I ate 3,200 calories a day. So I wasn't eating in excess. I was just changing the nutritional content of my calories, but I was still exercising. You know, I was still working out. I was still walking like 14,000 steps a day. So I was still fairly active. I ended up losing weight on net. Another really interesting outcome of it though was that my body fat redistributed towards visceral adipose tissue, which is that's the bad fat.
Hmm.
So I went from, zero point 0.2 pounds of visceral adipose tissue to 1.1 pounds of visceral adipose tissue, which doesn't sound like a huge increase, but it is a 5.5 times increase
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
30 days.
Yeah. That's a
And
lot.
that's despite losing fat on net.
Yeah. And despite working out throughout the whole period,
Right.
right? Yeah. That's interesting. Okay. So you have this basically very good gut health and you don't have a lot of problems. I'm curious then what inspired this idea? Where'd the idea to develop Throne come from?
Yeah, I am not one of those founders who was inspired by my own problem and sought out to solve my own problem. I started Throne originally. So I'll take a step back. My now co-founder, Tim, we met playing poker back in 2021 as kind of our COVID bubble activity. And we were talking about startup ideas around the poker table with a bunch of our other friends in the tech community. And I'd asked the question, do any of you have startup ideas that you'd love to start but don't want your name associated with? And Tim joked, he goes, I've always wanted to measure your poop. And I was like, that's hilarious. You know, name it Throne, put a leaderboard on it and sell it into frat houses.
Yeah.
And that was just kind of this running joke that, picked up within our friend group and specifically between Tim and I for years. And we both come from healthcare families. We ended up going and working at a company together. I recruited him to be one of our early engineers, and we knew we wanted to go start something together. We didn't know what we wanted it to be. We ended up starting a different concept in healthcare and pretty quickly realized that wasn't the thing we wanted to be doing. So as we were looking for, other ideas, one of our friends was like, have you guys thought about smart toilets? And I was like, like we've named it Throne
Yeah.
and we've talked about it for years, but we haven't actually looked into this in any, degree of sincerity. And so then the next call I made was to my mom, who's a gastroenterologist, or not, well, not gastroenterologist, gerontologist. So she's primary care physician for, geriatrics, old people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I called her and I was like, hey, mom, is there any medical utility to looking at human waste? And she told me, I'll never forget verbatim. She goes, honey, I have stopped giving my cell phone number to my patients because they will send me so many pictures of poop. And that was kind of
What?
just like aha moment for us. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she, she went on to elaborate, old people, uh, kind of the joke is that they talk about three things, like their kids, their meds, and their poop. And as you age, you're typically, working less. Your digestive health is changing. Your gut motility starts to slow down. You're aware of these changes and you think a lot about it. You talk a lot about it. And that was, I think, the first kind of like light bulb moment for us, like, whoa, there might be something interesting here. And then that kind of inspired what became a very just organic exploration of like, what are the various conditions that, manifest in gastroenterological and urological symptoms that could be monitored. And then, what are the different sensing modalities if you wanted to monitor those biomarkers? How useful are they? And then ultimately, okay, once we determined like, yeah, there are, you know, tons of health conditions, really a half dozen or so that affect, you know, hundreds of millions of Americans. So between like IBS, IBD, benign prostatic hyperplasia, chronic kidney disease, recurrent kidney stone formers, chronic dehydration, those are the big ones. Like that's roughly 200 to 250 million Americans, depending on kind of, whose estimates you're looking at and, you know, not accounting for comorbidities. But just looking at that, then it became like, okay, wow, like there's a real market here for this, but like, what are the different ways we could do it? Um, and that was an exploration of contact measurement versus non-contact measurement. Contact measurement, you can, if you ever use like a pool chemical strip, right? Where you dip the chemical strip in the pool and it tells you how much chlorine and bromines in the pool. Like
Yeah.
they have those for basically every metabolite under the sun for looking at urine. And there's a few companies trying to do stuff in that space. We looked at that for a little bit. The problem is you can buy those strips on Amazon for like 26 cents a strip, and the next best alternative is like a test where you just like pee in a cup and dip it in, and you know, I think that's
Still not. I don't know that doesn't seem like a very fun
it's
procedure to go through.
it's not very fun, right? Like you're most people hate doing anything manual in the bathroom.
Yeah,
The problem is though, if you're actually motivated, like 26 cents is a tough price to beat.
yeah,
Um, and you also just get kind of into a long tail problem where like the metabolites that are interesting to you might not be interesting to me. And anyway, and also now you're dealing with consumables, which just makes your supply chain much more complicated. And we really wanted, like, if we could make a device that was just set it and forget it, one time install, and then it just sits there and passively collects data, that's obviously superior user experience. And that's kind of the thing we wanted to optimize for, is something that people actually use for years at a time. And that's what drove us towards the form function or the form factor of Throw Now, which is, the toilet camera. And then it just became like a really, I think we appreciated the logic of it. We were still very scared that it was too out there for people to be accepting of.
yeah.
And so it took a lot of convincing ourselves that this was actually viable. And we had to go, we ran polls online, and then we threw up a landing page and pointed some Facebook ads at it, and people started signing up for that. And we are like, what on earth is happening? Like, and then finally the real kind of the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, was we just stood outside of Trader Joe's in downtown Austin one day and accosted 30 strangers walking outside of TJ's and asked them like, hey, if you could monitor gut health or hydration, is that something that would be interesting to you? And everybody said yes. And Austin's also just a generally kind of health conscientious city, so target market. Um, and then finally, we'd interview them, ask them, 10 more questions. But the last question always was, okay, but like now let's say we're doing this with like a camera in your toilet pointed down. Like, you know, how receptive are you to that, or how much does that offend you? And nobody was offended. Like not a single person was put off by the
Really?
idea. And one person asked where they could invest. And I think that was the moment when Tim and I looked at each other, we were like, holy shit, like someone has to do this. And I think it's us.
Yeah. So you guys just went out to people on the street and just asked people.
Oh,
That's
because at
great.
that point, we'd already done a lot of research online, and the results we were getting back from our polls and from our Facebook ads were like super encouraging, but it's still just pixels on a screen,
Yeah.
like you got to be able to look into someone's eyes and
Yeah.
be like, I'm going to put a toilet, or I'm going to put a camera in your toilet. It's gonna pay me to do that, and you're excited about this too. And like
Yeah.
everyone's like, yeah,
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, basically you just did your own focus group out on the street with people. That's
100%.
that's really cool. Now, so what's happening with the Game of Thrones thing? Is this going to happen too? Is this part of it? I love that idea.
What what is the Game of Thrones thing?
I thought you said Game of Thrones when you were talking about selling it to like fraternity houses and whatnot. Is that what I thought that's what you said.
No, 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 no. That was just naming it Throne, just because I thought it was a fun.
I thought you said, I thought you said Game of Thrones, which actually, like, if you do a thing where you make a competition, you could make a whole online competition out of this. Like everyone have the best hydration. Imagine that.
100%. That like there's so much fun marketing we can do here. There's so much fun community building you can do here because like I mean we've thought about Game of Thrones tie-ins for sure. I'm a big Game of Thrones fan, but I I think it's losing relevancy by the day, right? Like and then B,
Yeah, I don't even like the show that much. I just thought that's what you said. So you're telling me you didn't say Game of Thrones just a minute ago.
oh, if I did, I didn't mean to. But I think to your point though, just about like, making it competitive. I don't know that competitive is necessarily the thing that we wanted to do, but we do
Yeah.
think there's a huge social aspect here because, NPR wrote a piece, I don't know, a year or two ago called Poop Friends, all about how there is a special inner sanctum of friendship, which is the friends that you can talk about your bowel movements with. And like, I can share my Aura Ring scores with my friends. I can share my Whoop scores with my other Whoop using friends. And I definitely think there's, something really special about the types of people that you were willing to share your throne scores with.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you with your coworkers, you're just talking about it pretty casually, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We have a leaderboard in the office for who has the longest pee every day. And I don't think that's something that we want to productize at scale just because that can actually lead to some dangerous scenarios. But competing for hydration status, competing
Yeah.
for, this gut health streak, I think that's really fun stuff.
Yeah, I love that idea. And it actually might improve people's health and whatnot, right?
Totally. I mean, I love competition. I think some friendly competition is a tremendously motivating force.
So you guys started this then after you got all the good feedback from people, online polls, your little focus group and whatnot. How about when I'm assuming you went to investors then to try to get people to actually put money into this? I imagine that is probably an unusual pitch, or maybe it wasn't. I don't know. What was that like?
So yes and no. It's unusual in that there's not a whole lot of smart toilet companies out there. There have been a few. None have gone with the approach that we're taking, which is direct to consumer and a clip-on device that's not a bidet. I think when you navigate, you know, just the many different paths you could take to build something in this space, there's a tremendous bias towards building a bidet device. And anyways, long story short, the pitch hasn't been nearly as difficult as you might think. I
Hmm.
think a lot of folks have wanted to see something succeed in this space for a long time. I think there's a confluence of factors that makes it really exciting to be doing it today in 2024, which is that gut health, just as a national conversation, has never been more relevant. People
Yeah.
are way more, hip to how important your gut health is as a foundation for your overall health and wellness than they were 5 years ago. I think the advent of AI and computer vision and just the advances we've seen in the last 3 years have made things really exciting. And, it's actually viable for a small startup to build in this space. Whereas, 6, 7 years ago, it just would have been orders of magnitude more expensive to achieve what we've achieved in the last year. Um, and then finally, I think the other kind of big piece of this is like wearables paved the road for us.
Yeah.
I think Whoop, Aura, 8 Sleep levels, they had to walk so that Throne could run, right? Like
Yeah.
there's not a world in which Throne exists in which people aren't already accustomed to personal health monitoring through devices and like Apple Watch, right? That's probably
Yeah.
the most well-known wearable. And personal health monitoring had to already be a thing. It was never going to start with a toilet camera.
Right. Right. So it's finding its place in line, really, after all the other stuff sort of, yeah, paved the road. So investors were sort of responded well to it. As you and I are talking here too, I'm thinking about, I don't know if you watch Shark Tank. Do you watch? Maybe you do.
I don't watch it regularly, but I've watched my fair share of Shark Tank, particularly in like high school.
Yeah. So there was an episode, I don't know, it must be like 5 years ago now. Maybe you've heard of this product, but I happened to be watching, I don't watch it all the time, watch it sometimes with my kids. Uh, some founders went on there with this product called the Squatty Potty. Have you heard of this? And
Oh yeah.
when I was watching it, I was like, you got to be kidding me, right? I thought they were going to get laughed out of there. And they not only were they not laughed out of there, they got a deal. And then it went on to sell like I don't know, some crazy amount of I don't know, it was in the millions in sales, you know?
Yeah, I own a squatty potty. I think they're great, and I mean, this goes back to the conversation around just gut health and digestive health. Is like people are more receptive to these ideas than they were, 10 years ago. And I think, things like the squatty potty helped make that part of the national
Yeah.
conversation. Um, you know, bidets are kind of having their moment right now. That was a big thing. But bidets really took off in COVID. You remember that weird moment in COVID where it was like, oh, we're gonna run out of toilet paper. Like
Yes.
that was a crazy thing that I don't know if that had any basis in reality, but it certainly led to a surge in use of bidets and also just like working from home.
Yeah.
If you're going to be using the same toilet 5 times a day or twice a day instead of a couple times a week, might as well invest in upgrading that toilet. Um, and so, anyways, people, particularly in the US, are just way more receptive to toilet technologies than they were a decade ago.
Yeah. Speaking of bidets, have you ever, so I was talking about Japan earlier. Have you ever used any of the toilets that they have in Japan? Um, the Toto. Have you
I
ever used
I
a
have one
Toto?
at home. Market research.
Wait, you have a Toto?
Yes, I got one of the Toto washlets. I think it was like 350
Yeah.
um after tax, after sale or something, but it's it is an upgrade. It is a
Right.
lifestyle choice that is worth making.
Yeah. So you know what I'm talking about then with the difference in like traditional American toilet habits and that. Now, I'm wondering, those Toto toilets are pretty amazing. Are you sort of envisioning Throne being like a licensable technology to go on to, for toilet makers to then add to their thing? So like when you get a new toilet or when, a home builder builds a home with toilets in it, that just comes equipped sort of like out of the box.
I don't see why we wouldn't be open to that down the line. It's just not a focus right now. Like
Yeah.
we're really focused on making our device so that it's compatible with every toilet, and it's a very simple installation. You just slide it onto the toilet and you're done.
Yeah.
We've talked about like we could do a bidet, but at that point we're now competing in the bidet market when we could be complementary to that market.
Right.
And you know, I don't see why we wouldn't do that down the line, but I think that's going to be one of those situations we'll wait for someone to approach us.
Yeah. Got it. So I wanted to talk about just sort of having a sense of humor about all of this, because I guess there's like sort of like a potty humor aspect to all this. And I noticed like on your Twitter bio, you actually have, it says like what does it say? Like shit, the world's shittiest CEO or something, I think. Is that what it
World's
is?
founder.
Founder, yeah. So that's great. I mean, you must have to just not take yourself too seriously at points to do this job and to run this whole company and product.
It's something I think a lot about because it really is a bit of a tightrope walk because we are first and foremost a health company, not a toilet company.
Right.
And that is super important. And when you look at the Throne brand, I want it to feel more like a health spa than a toilet company. Um, so that is the foundational framing from which I start. That said, let's talk about the comedy side of it. We are intrinsically dealing with, potty humor, right? It's
Yeah.
poop. Funny. Like even in our discovery calls with people that have chronic digestive diseases, like I literally cannot think of a single call of the hundreds we've had where we didn't, crack jokes and smile because it's and honestly, it's one of my favorite parts of this whole journey is just like how fun it is because it's just intrinsically comedy gold.
Yeah.
That said, the other side of this, being a health company, is that we have to be reverent of the fact that a lot of people that have chronic health conditions, like particularly IBD and IBS, especially when they're flaring, it governs their life. And there are days where they're glued to the toilet and cannot leave the house. Or if they do leave the house, they don't want to drive more than 15, 20 minutes away from the house. And as soon as they arrive to their location, they have to identify where the bathroom is just in case, right? Like it, and that is something I am very attuned to now. And so, kind of the way we think about the brand is we want to position ourselves so that you think of us as a serious health company. But then if other people make jokes about us, like we're so okay with that, right? Like there are like I have not gotten on a phone call in the last year where somebody didn't make a poop joke. It, the puns are endless, and we don't have to be the ones to make those jokes, right? We just have to embrace them and
Yeah.
say like we can laugh at them and retweet them and stuff, but we're not the ones making the jokes ourselves. We're the ones building, a I don't want to say serious, but respectable brand.
Yeah.
And we'll let others make the jokes at our expense and just laugh with them.
It is what it is too, like people are gonna react in certain ways. It's just, actually I thought when I saw your Twitter bio, I thought that was hilarious and it's great. And it almost reminded me, I don't know if you seem well younger than me, but I don't know if you've watched Seinfeld. Have you ever watched Seinfeld?
I've watched a few episodes here and there, but I haven't watched the whole series through cover to cover.
There's a great point where Kramer talks about meeting a proctologist, and he's like, if you ever meet one at a party, like just park yourself next to that person, and because you're going to hear the greatest stories, you know. So I sort of thought about that, and then also watching some of your videos, I thought you were just a very like from a personality standpoint, like you didn't take yourself overly seriously, you know, which I don't know. I think is probably good for what you're trying to do, and you know, like you said, this is not total, I guess not entirely new, but I think to a mass market, most people probably have not thought about some of these things before, you know, so you have to like reach them somehow, you know.
100%. And that's, when I think about our go-to-market strategy, the reality is comedy is going to be a big part of it. We're just not going to necessarily be the ones making the jokes, right? So, but by that I mean, we are building the respected health brand. When you show up to our website, we're going to have, as seen in Men's Health, and we're going to have quotes from doctors and, testimonials from users, you know, basically building credibility. We need to be credible first and foremost. I think that is
Absolutely. Yeah.
that is the word, credible. That said, on social media, people can make jokes about us, and we're happy if you find out about Throne through a meme or, a stupid Instagram reel or a TikTok that's, making fun of us, because as long as it gets your attention and you go to our website, all it needs to happen is like you get to our website and your reaction is, oh, whoa, this is actually legit.
Yeah.
And the content is infinitely memeable, right? Like I love that. This is like it's a freaking toilet camera, like that is it's like just the phrase toilet cameras, a joke. But it's also dead serious. Like that's kind of
Yeah.
there's this duality to it. It's so fun. Um,
It almost sounds illegal, to be honest with you.
right. And like in 180 degrees, it would be illegal.
Yeah. Mhm. Um, that's great. I mean, yeah, I look at it, I look at you and sort of what you're doing, and you know, it's almost like Elon Musk in a way. You know, if you go to if like, so I own a Tesla, and actually now that I'm thinking about it, Tesla. Have you ever driven? Do you have a Tesla, or have you driven in
I
a
don't
Tesla?
have a Tesla, but I've driven in my friend's Tesla.
Okay, so I don't know if they've ever shown you like the fart capability. Are you familiar with this?
No, but I know the Easter eggs. I actually use Tesla as an analogy for like Tesla as a brand is like they're the brand that they put out in all of their marketing is like, this crisp, sexy,
Yes.
super clean, tight lines, high contrast. But then they have these Easter eggs, like the fart
Yes.
capability, or like, there I saw the one with the Cybertruck where it's like you could break the glass on the Cybertruck, kind of poking fun at that, famous demo where
Yeah, where
you
you sledgehammer it.
exactly. And like I think that's great because like when you build this really respectable brand, you can undermine your brand very tactically with punchlines and then kind of retreat back to the ivory tower, and it only further serves to underscore that you live in an ivory tower, right?
Yeah.
Like Tesla's brand is like very clean and sexy, but also like self-aware. I don't know. That's something I actually respect and admire a lot about
So
them.
as you were describing it, that's what I was thinking. It is like that when you go to like the Tesla website, it is a pure, you know, it's a very clean experience, and it's like when you go through and you actually when you buy a Tesla, you just order it online. You do the whole thing online. Um, but you'd never have any idea that their car farts, you know, which my 9-year-old daughter absolutely loves. You know, it's like her favorite thing about the car. But it's a lot of fun too, like when you get something like that. So I don't know. I just thought similar sort of approach to just having fun while still being serious about your product.
That's one of those things, going back to the conversation about like leaderboards and competition, right? Like I think that's the kind of stuff like we don't want to market that, but it creates word of mouth, right? Like the fact that the car farts, we're here talking about it now, and
Yeah.
your daughter loves it, and I'm sure talks about it with her friends. Like same thing with Throne is I want to market ourselves as a very serious health product, respected, credible. But then there is also the opportunity to build some really fun features that are goofy and lighthearted and silly and, you know, like talk worthy. It's
Yeah.
it's something that you would, want to tell your friends about just because it made you smile. And those are the things I don't want to advertise those. I just want people to find them and talk about them.
Listen, a couple more questions for you. And just to switch gears a little bit here, I sent you an article earlier today coming out of the New York Times, and we haven't talked about alcohol at all. But this story struck me. A new report out from cancer researchers saying that there's this been a huge rise in the amount of gastrointestinal cancers in younger people, actually. And they think, that part of this is caused by regular alcohol consumption, among other things. I forget the wording they used actually, something like modifiable behaviors. Things you do, but you don't necessarily have to do. You don't have to drink alcohol. I was
Yeah,
wondering just kind of what's that?
lifestyle choices.
Yeah, lifestyle choices, exactly. I'm kind of wondering what you've seen with that, if anything, in terms of alcohol. Do you drink much? Kind of what do you recommend?
Yeah, so I personally I gave up drinking earlier this year actually. For totally arbitrary reasons. I love drinking with my friends, but also um, I started doing an experiment at the beginning of the year where my friends and I started a shared Apple Note, and we had to keep track of every single day that we had drinks. We were only allowed 50 days for the year, so less than one a week. And what I found is that a couple things. Number one is explaining that to people got very frustrating, just because people would be like, "Why aren't you drinking?" And then I'd explain this whole thing to them, and that takes a couple minutes. And then the next thing immediately is, well, you should just make today one of your 50 days.
Yeah,
Or like, why won't you drink with us? And so, by the time we got to April, I had drank 8 days, and I realized I'd only really, felt a buzz twice, and I didn't miss it. And I'm also now in this kind of like health and longevity world, and obviously, you know, there's not exactly positive longevity associations with alcohol. Um, I take that back. There is some research suggesting that most like the healthiest amount of alcohol consumption is one drink every 2 days,
yeah,
and then it falls off, right? And the reason there is because they think that's associated with a healthy social life, which does have strong longevity associations.
yeah,
So people who don't drink generally have, less of a social circle than people that drink very, infrequently, a couple of drinks a week type thing. But I don't think it's the alcohol, right?
right.
Um, that said, I just decided to give it up. Um, and I have not missed it, so that haven't had a drink since April. And I don't know if that's a forever thing or for right now thing, but my general take, I think alcohol is obviously bad for you. All good things in moderation. But if you look at like historical alcohol consumption, like per capita, it seems unlikely to me that that's the thing driving this increase in the incidence of chronic disease and colon cancer. Um, just because we drink roughly the same amount today as we have since like on average since 1900 per capita, and we drink less today than we did in the 60s and 80s. Not a whole lot less, 10, 20% less, but like still we're drinking less today, but the incidence of colon cancer and GI cancers and, chronic disease continues to rise. Personally, my belief is that it has to be the food. And, I think there's a lot of people that disagree with that, but, I do think it's the ultra processed foods. And if you just look at, again, just going back to like 1900, ultra processed food accounted for 0% of your daily caloric intake. The first ultra processed foods started with the advent of trans fats in 1902. Um, and even then, there were, we talked about like Oreos and hot dogs were invented in the 1910s. UPF didn't really proliferate until World War One, so 1917, which drove kind of the demand for shelf stable, high calorie food that can be shipped and stored without spoilage. Again, we're talking about supply chains at war, and
Yep.
war is often, what drives innovation. Um, and so then you look back, like basically in the last 120 years, we went from 0% of our calories being ultra processed foods to now where we stand, which is like 70 to 75% of the US food supply is ultra processed in some way, shape, or form. And so when I think about that, like Homo sapiens have been around for give or take 300,000 years. In like 120 years, we went from eating 100% off land and sea to like three-quarters of our diet being, something industrial.
Yeah.
And like, I'm far from the first person to make that argument, but it just like seems crazy to me that it would be anything but the food.
Yeah. Seems like, I mean, that seems like a shock to the evolutionary system, right?
Oh,
Like, yeah. So so you think it's food more than anything, but I guess I'm wondering too, like when you're monitoring your waste, do you see any differences after you've dried? And I know it's been a while for you, but did that have any? I mean, or even just your pee? Does that make you? Does it dehydrate you? Like what are you noticing the effects of alcohol are?
um, I mean, I definitely was far more dehydrated in the mornings after drinking, right? Like, one of the interesting things with like hydration monitoring is that oftentimes we start our days, you know, specifically with coffee. Like most people don't wake up first thing in the morning and hit the bottle,
Yeah,
but you wake up in the morning, you're dehydrated, you're feeling foggy and groggy, and instead of drinking 10 ounces of water, you're like, I'm gonna drink some coffee, and coffee is a diuretic, so you're just compounding your dehydration rather than addressing the problem at the root, which is just drink water. And that's obviously compounded even further if you've been drinking the night before. And I can actually go back and look. I'm not sure what my hydration scores. I'd have to go back to like last year because I started the experiment of 50 days at the beginning of this year. But like, let me just go back and see what my hydration scores were in
yeah,
December. Wow. Okay, this is actually really interesting. So my average hydration score for December was 71%. Whereas if I go back to now, it's like 75%. So not great.
yeah.
Um,
But
yeah,
better when you're not drinking. It sounds
yeah,
like. Yeah.
exactly.
And what is average on the hydration score? What's like an average number?
For me, it now hovers about like 75%, but like it depends on the person, right? Like I was telling you, like my buddy Clark, he has one of our devices and his average is like 92% probably. Like he's
Yeah.
between 90 and 95% daily.
Yeah, but when you're talking about all the people, like what's an
I
average? Are
I
you?
have no idea. I just haven't averaged out that number.
Yeah,
I've asked our team to do some math and figure that out, but I don't have it off the top of my
yeah,
head.
yeah. No, just curious, I just imagine that you could really like find out about the population, and sort of where people sit
Oh,
and that sort of stuff with this data.
oh yeah, that's some of the stuff like the population data the population level data is something I'm very excited about the potential of, particularly less looking at hydration, right? I think part of it's interesting in terms of like, you know, saying like, you are 5% more hydrated than the average person or,
Yeah,
10% less hydrated. And I think that there's a little bit of motivation in that. People like to be above average,
yeah,
right? Everyone likes to think we're always above average.
yeah,
The other thing that I'm most excited by is this potential of what I call a lookalike gut. Are you familiar with the concept of a lookalike audience in online advertising?
yeah,
So yeah, so for listeners who aren't, it's basically, you take the cohort of people who have bought your product online. You say, what are the characteristics in common? What are the commonalities amongst all of our customers? And then you go build a separate audience of non-customers that have those same characteristics, and then you advertise to them, right? With the thinking being like, hey, these people all bought our product, and they have these five things in common. Other people with those five things in common are probably more likely to buy our product.
right.
Works fairly well in online advertising. And I want to do the same thing, but for gut health, where basically, hey, let's track all your inputs and outputs with Throne. Let's monitor your foods, your medications, your supplements. Let's monitor your bowel movements. And then because like one of the things that's most frustrating to people, particularly with IBS diagnosis, is that IBS is just a description of symptoms. It does not say anything about the root cause. So it's people with IBS hate that diagnosis, and it's often considered like a non-diagnosis because you're not actually learning anything about yourself. So what I want to do is say, hey, let's look at your inputs and outputs. Let's look at other people that had a similar profile to their guts. And then what were the interventions that actually worked for them, right? Did they cut red meat out of their diet or did they add magnesium to their diet? And like what actually helped improve their regularity? And let's start you with like instead of just like throwing darts at the dartboard and doing this completely trial and error at random, let's start you with the top three things that we think are most likely to work based on other people who had similar, inputs and outputs to your
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I mean, so you're talking about even using like an AI suggestion, right?
100%.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really cool idea. Um, you know, so much better than just taking a guess, right?
Yeah.
So listen, I really I do wish you the best of luck with this product, and thank you for coming on and talking. And I know I don't talk about this a lot, but when I reached out to you, I told you my dad died, from colon cancer. And basically, just to like go into that a little bit, I don't like to get too personal with this stuff, but he just got to the doctor too late, is what they told him. And with a product like this, I feel like that could literally make a life changing difference, for people. So I like the goal here, and just thought you're super interesting and had to talk to you about all this.
That means a lot, Andrew. And then just, thank you for reaching out. I'm sorry for your loss.
Yeah,
And just
it was a long time ago, 20 years.
still,
Yeah, thank you.
the thing about colon cancer is your story, your dad's story is shockingly common, right? Like colon cancer is the second deadliest cancer in the country behind only lung cancer. It's the deadliest cancer for men under 50. And it's the easiest cancer to cure, right? Like if you get a colonoscopy
Yeah,
early enough, you catch it early, it's gone.
yeah,
And so
it doesn't even have to elevate the cancer. Yeah,
and that the only reason it's as deadly as it is to exactly what you just described, right? People catch it too late. And we just want to be, I think, 10 years from now, I want people to think about throwing the same way you think about like a smoke detector, which is like you have one hoping that it never saves your life, right? Like you really don't want a house fire,
yeah,
but it's far better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it.
yep, yep. So it goes to mass market at the end of this year, or is it going, not maybe not mass market, but it's going out, people can get it?
No, so we're going to be trickling out different batches of beta users for probably the next 6 to 12 months
Okay.
while we find the user experience and make sure that we're building something people really love before we go build 10,000 of these. So the first batch is 100 units. We'll build the next batch of probably 200 to 500 units and continue to iterate from there. And once we've locked in on the design and we know that, yes, this is something people love, right now the device is button, you have to use a button to use it. We want to get to the point where it's hands-free.
Right.
So to be totally honest with you, I never expected that we would get the attention of people like yourself this early on, right? Like we I think you probably found me, you mentioned through social media, right? Like we had a viral moment a couple weeks ago where I sent a tweet that got half a
Right.
million views, and that was the first time we ever posted a picture of the product to the timeline. And that was like a shell shock moment for us just because we were like, whoa, like we've clearly struck the zeitgeist here in a way that I do not think we anticipated this early on. We're very intentional about. We want to be this deliberate, slow, controlled growth and make sure that we've actually, built something that's retentive that people love before we try and go blow it up. So we're still refining the product before we go and, pour fuel on the flame.
Sure, sure. There's a process, trust the process. So if people want to get it though, what can they do? Right? Like what can
So,
someone do right now?
so we're sold out of the first batch of devices. So we're shipping this first batch end of October. The next batch will ship next spring. And you have to wait longer, but the good news is you'll get the next version of the product, which will have improvements made on base what we learned from this batch. Um, if you wanted one right now, the best way to go is you can sign up for the wait list at thronescience.com. You can also pre-order a device, and if you pre-order it, use the code Scott40 at checkout for $40 off. So that'll knock it down, I think, what, 260 instead of 300. And yeah, like sincerely, at this point, we're just kind of like amazed that people are willing to put money down for a device, several months out, and we're just
Yeah.
honored and humbled by everyone's support, and super appreciate even just you taking the time to bring us on the show.
Yeah. And as far as the app goes, can people download the app and just start using that like
Not,
manually or
not
no?
yet. So we're still in test flight, which is kind of the, where you live before you go to the App Store. We'll launch the device and the app publicly at the same time next year. If you want to use the app, just reach out to me at scott@thronescience.com, and I'm happy to send you a link to download the beta app, but you do have to be on iPhone.
Yeah, very cool. Well, again, thanks for coming on and talking all about this. You're a super interesting guy, and all the best of luck going forward with it. I really hope, I hope maybe in a year you come back on and we can talk about where you are. Hopefully by then it's out there in the wild and people are using it. A lot of people. Yeah.
Oh.
All right. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it.